if you're asking a question in person, that you limit that question time to under a minute, just to give as many people the opportunity to ask questions as possible. And then we'll still be collecting written questions up and down the aisles, the volunteers in the black shirts as well. Without further ado, let's welcome our moderator, Ms. Fiona Ma, of the Board of Legalization.
Thank you so much. I am very glad that the drivers in Northern California are not scared of driving in the rain. I left my San Francisco office at 9:30, opening up for the Go Biz seminar down there, and made it in record time, just like I normally do when it's not raining. Thank you all for coming. I apologize I wasn't here earlier, but I'm sure Tim Moreland did a great job emceeing. I wasn't here, and I knew he did a great job. He MCs all of our stakeholder meetings. We've had one on banking and one on transportation, and we're going to do another one on track and trace next month. And so he's becoming an expert at these panel discussions. I just want to say that this has been an interesting year. I got elected last year, starting in January 5th. And one of the questions one of my colleagues posed to me was, Ms. Ma, do you want to help me figure out how much sales taxes we're collecting from all of the dispensaries in California? And I said, of course. And that's how we got Ken Pfeiffer on board. And I think it took about 7 months to figure out that we collected about $44 million in sales taxes from only about 25% of the dispensaries. Now, when you sign up as a dispensary, there's no code to check. So you're either maybe healthcare or agriculture or food. And so, you know, it was really, really difficult trying to put it together. So that's how we started in this quest for figuring out what the industry is doing. And in the meantime, obviously the big elephant in the room is banking. Started to understand that it's an issue, a major issue, and becoming more of an issue as the federal government was shutting down many of the bank accounts from some of the bigger dispensaries that were out there that have been around. So what can we do? Well, obviously we are working on a California alternative, an option. I figure California is the 8th largest economy in the world. We can figure it out here. So I need all of your help to help us do that. And I know that we have a bunch of banking questions here, so we're going to kind of start getting into the question and answers, and I'm just going to turn it over to Tim.
All right, so I have a list of great questions, by the way. I'm just reading through these very quickly. I'm going to go off the first question since we're talking about banking. And sorry, I can't remember the name, but basically the question is, what do you see happening with finance and banking? Is anybody on this panel, Fiona or anybody, wants to jump in on that issue? And maybe our lawyers.
All right, so I'll jump in. You know, I was really disappointed that none of the initiative writers would include anything in banking. I pushed them all really hard, and I said, listen, our initiative process is whatever you put in the initiative and the voters pass it, that becomes the will of the people, and it supersedes anything else that the legislature is really doing. So I really tried to get some language in there to, you know, push us in California to figure out a banking alternative. In the meantime, we have some cleanup language that Assemblymember Bonta is carrying that has some sort of study bill that is going to ask the Government and Oversight Committee to look into the alternatives. We're kind of working on it. In the meantime, anybody who has any ideas, options, we are open and willing to listen and meet with anyone and try any alternatives. As we all know, the FDIC is an issue and trying to get that master agreement. But in the meantime, you know, people are saying, what about Bitcoin? And I'm just ordered a tax book on Bitcoin to read up more about that. I mean, I am like really trying to figure out what we can do. So, lawyers? I wish I had the answer to this one. I mean, I think on the issue of banking, it's the one area that really requires, in addition to several others, but this one it really requires action on the federal level and change on the federal level. And I think one area that we're likely to get it even maybe before some others because of the realization of that this is really in the Fed's hands and the need. There's nobody that thinks it's a good idea for this to be an all-cash industry, and it is obviously moving forward in many states that way. And so I think it needs change on the federal level, and I think we'll see it sooner rather than later. And I think the fact that we're going into November 16, where California is likely to legalize marijuana, which is just a whole different scale than anything that's happened before, right? It's 10 times bigger than the other states that have done so. In addition to states, there's 4 or 5 other states that may legalize. We're talking in November this year, perhaps the entire West Coast, including, Arizona and Colorado and those areas legalize. That's really going to kick something in gear that we're now talking about on such a scale that it will kick in a federal change.
Yeah, and I hope so, and I hope we're all, speaking with one voice. The treasurer and tax collectors, I met with them, and they're going to get more engaged because they are seeing more cash coming into their offices. The assessors now are seeing people pay their property taxes in cash, and clearly they haven't been prepared to take all of this cash. So I think people are starting to be concerned about it and to really kind of push all of us to say, hey, what's going to happen if the federal government does not act?
Yeah, real quick, I'd just like to add, I had 2 or 3 people stop me during the break saying, how can we get involved? Here's how you can help. California's congressional delegation is the largest in the entire country. Get on the phone with your Congress members, find out where your family members live, have them call their district office explaining the benefits of medical marijuana, explaining that the problem of banking is actually creating access issues. Give your local Congress members the cover they need to actually act to back legislation, because until it happens in DC, we're not going to see much change here other than these sort of different alternative banking options pop up and pop down, pop up and pop down. So this is how you can get involved. This is where you all can make an actual change.
So there's a House Resolution 2076 in Congress right now. So Nate's advice is great. Do that. Contact your local congressperson and really lobby them, grassroots lobby them about this issue. I'd like to commend Assemblymember Lackey for authoring Assembly Joint Resolution 25, which Fiona sponsored last year, and that's urging Congress to do something about the banking issue. And related to the banking issue, I had a question about the tribes, Wayne. What's good? You hear stories about tribes trying to bank the industry. So what's going on there? It seems confusing to me, and it's kind of wishy-washy information I get. So
I'm not quite sure the question.
Can tribes bank the industry? I've heard of attempts, and
I think that in terms of the banking part of it, it's kind of what you just said. It's another one of those alternative kind of ideas. Like, there are several tribes that have their own banks, but all those banks are under the FDIC, so they're still under the federal regulations. That's how they have to operate. So you can't, tribes, like I said earlier, are inherently federal. And so when you're dealing with tribes, you're dealing with almost like a quasi-federal entity. So they report directly to the feds. So when a state like California or Colorado, Washington, wherever, wants to do something different than what the federal government has, quite frankly, tribes aren't the place to look, because they have probably more restrictions on them, on the feds, than even individuals in the state. And the tribes, their land sits on federal land, and Greg knows well, and mess with the feds.
I guess it's the very bottom line issue here, and I want to ask Fiona, is there anything that the state of California can do to facilitate banking without federal cooperation?
Yeah, so we were working with the Fourth Corner Credit Union in Colorado and kind of following their case. They actually chartered under the state of California, but it was a private entity. So I think the next thinking was, can California charter
a credit union that is privately insured. And that's where I'd like to kind of explore, and I think now that they had a ruling from the, the Supreme Court, I think fourth quarter is looking to do that and kind of see where we can take it in California. But that's what I think. If we can't get the FDIC insurance, then we're going to have to go to private insurance, and maybe some of the industry folks, are going to be willing to pool in the money to actually privately insure this type of credit union.
Yeah, and the reason I ask, and we're also concerned about that, I can report that my case that I discussed earlier, it's a federal case regarding the appropriations bill, which finances the whole government. There were 2 amendments added to the appropriations bill, which went into effect January 1st, 2016. One, the Department of Justice cannot interfere with states implementing their own medical marijuana laws, and it cannot interfere with states implementing their own hemp laws. However, there were 2 other amendments that failed to be included. One was that the VA could recommend marijuana to its patients, and 2, that the feds had to back off on the banking stuff. So it's actually, they are very actively pursuing banks that deal with medical cannabis to this day.
No, and that's why it's becoming more and more of an issue, is because some of our largest dispensaries have actually lost their long-time banking opportunities, relationships, and then even when they were, switching banks and stuff, now it's kind of out there that, people don't want to open up a bank. I have a question for the experts here. Someone asked me, if the federal government deschedules it from a level 1 drug to a 2 or a 3 or a 4, will that affect the banking opportunities?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, because once the federal government actually legitimizes it and says it is what it is, which is a medicine that can help you, it's going to, and they make that change from the federal level, it's not going to affect, well, I mean, from the industry point of view, it's not going to affect, businesses, and then which is the exact same thing for banks, because they're no longer going to be doing business with businesses that are dealing with a federally legal substance. They'll be dealing with businesses doing business with a legal substance. So I mean that's sort of a layman's term, but that's sort of the concept.
Yeah. Just to be clear, Bernie Sanders, for example, wants to deschedule cannabis. That means it's not scheduled. Alcohol is not scheduled. Lots of things are not scheduled. Hillary Clinton has said in public recently that she would change it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. Schedule 2 substances include methamphetamine and cocaine. So she wants to make marijuana in that schedule. It would loosen things up a little bit. There would be more research allowed. There are certain situations where cocaine can be prescribed by a physician. In Schedule 1, it supposedly has no medical uses at all. It is one among the most dangerous drugs. So any amount would help. I personally go with Bernie, and I think it should be.
So I think on the federal level, definitely, as Assemblymember Cooley mentioned, this is kind of an incremental process, and definitely on the federal level, things move much slower than on the state level. So wanted to get the next question in. What point should our industry make when asking local governments to provide? What point should our industry make when asking local governments to provide a permitting structure? Anybody want to jump in on that? Go ahead, Nick.
Talk about the benefits that it brings to your town to actually have it regulated versus relegated to an unregulated market. Because I think one of the biggest things that local governments don't understand is just because you don't allow it doesn't mean it's not being sold. And that would be the biggest benefit. Also you could point to examples of towns like Richmond, where in Richmond they were able to fund their entire vice squad that does enforcement on not just dispensaries, but on tattoo parlors, liquor stores, adult bookstores, and so you can point at positive examples. Point is where regulation works. For example, I remember one of the former deputy as city managers from Oakland, used to have a map in his office of all the dispensaries. So he had a circle around each map, and he would refer to those as the crime-free zones of Oakland. And so being educated with the actual data like that is I think is one of the best options, and then establishing the actual relationships with your local government officials.
I mean, what Nate says is true. It's important to keep in mind the operating political reality in those cities. The fact of the matter is that in California, 200 cities have banned medical marijuana activities. And you may not like to hear this, but in those cities, those bans are politically very popular. Not a single city council member has lost their seat around voting for one of those bans.
Yeah.
Because
Yahoo!